experimenting with this new rig I've set up for my recording videos. I have this old rickety tripod, and then I have a 1x2 furring strip sort of zip tied to it that reaches out over my work surface. And then I have two paint sticks zip tied to the furring strip, and then my phone is just sitting on this, so it's kind of a crazy contraption and it's super rickety, but hey, let's see if we can make it work. I just get excited about designing patterns and then I don't think about, oh, maybe I should record some of these techniques because maybe my explanations in the written instructions don't quite make sense. Anyway, so I'm starting this new heart pattern. It's like a Celtic heart. And I'm still experimenting, so I don't want to show anybody like the full pattern. Plus, I will probably have it in my Ravelry site when the time comes to release it. So what I've done so far is, you can see that what I do is I start out with white for the B rows and blue for the A rows. I guess it's like a light turquoise. And then when I got to this row, I wanted to have a purple outline with a bright pink inside color. You could totally do this in two colors. You could just do this in the A and B colors. They don't have to be 4 colors. But of course, I'm a bit extra, so of course I have to throw in extra colors. I'm just going to show you how I start out with one color in the row and then I switch to the next color, because I'm doing that in both rows. During these blue rows, I'm switching to purple, and then during the white rows, I'm switching to this magenta. And then like in this area, I have to switch back to white, and then I have to switch back to magenta, and then back to white. So, and I do this in areas that I know are going to be hidden by the next row. In some of my patterns, you don't have anywhere to hide that transition stitch, and there are a bunch of different ways to transition from one color to another, which you can see online, but this video is just going to show primarily how I secure my beginning tail, and then how I switch over to the next color, and then how I switch back as I'm securing the ending tail. So let me show you the back here. Yeah, super pretty, huh? So on the white rows, because we're doing double crochets, I can't really stitch over the pink because you'd see it right here. And there's nowhere on the back of a double crochet at the top to really stitch over. So I have just been taking the pink and tying it to one of these single crochets from the previous row, because these are all in the back. You're not going to see them. So I just take it and I tie it right there. And that way, and I just leave it hanging. And then as I'm stitching, when I'm ready, I have to transition here underneath this stitch, because on one side of the stitch I have a double crochet, and on the other side I need to see the pink. It needs to be visible. It can't have any white showing in the stitch. So I have to transition in the one stitch that'll be underneath this. And so we're going to start with a white row. It is row 15. And I'm just showing you a few of the extra rows below it. So in the previous row, I started with blue. I went through here. I secured my purple end in these back loop single crochets, because you can easily stitch over other yarns with single crochets. Right here, you can see where I stitched over it initially. I actually folded the tail over and then stitched over both the tail and the purple yarn in a couple stitches. Then I switched over and then I just stitched purple, purple, purple while stitching over the blue yarn, because you still have to bring your blue all the way through. And so you can kind of see the blue in here where I stitched over it. And then over here, when I transitioned back to the blue, I stitched over purple for a few more. And you can see how I also stitched over magenta, because at the end of the previous row where I was going from white to magenta, the very last stitch when I had to switch back to white, I had to go straight into double crochets. And so you just can't stitch over another color when you're doing double crochets. So I left the tail hanging, and then when I got up here to the next row, I just started stitching over the ending tail up here. So there's different ways you can stitch over the tails. Anyway, let's get started. I always put my ruler, I have paper right now, but I always put my ruler right above the line where I'm at. Because if you put it above where you're at, it gets confusing with the upcoming stitches, and you just don't want to confuse yourself. I sometimes put arrows when I have an angled stitch like this. If I had it below every time I moved up a line, I wouldn't see where these arrows are supposed to go. That's why I like to put my ruler above it so I can see the below stuff. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and show you these little few lines so you can kind of see where I came from and where I'm going. So this next row is a color B row. So I'm going to start out with white, and this is the first time I've done crochet where I'm trying to film myself. So I'm looking at what I'm doing, and I'm also looking at my phone at the same time. I'm going to edit it a little bit, but there may be some weird, awkward shots. Anyway, so I just do a standing single crochet. See, here we go. I was just out of the frame. There we go. I'm such a pro at this, aren't I? Let me get it all situated first. Okay. I do a standing single crochet. I don't know if that's the best way to start a row, because it tends to scrunch up. It might be better to, you know, put your hook in there and then do one chain and then start it, but I don't know. I'm lazy. I don't know what to call it. I just like standing single crochets or standing stitches. And so my first, you know, thing here is double crochet, and this is part of my border. I'm usually used to this border to where, oops, can't even stitch. I don't usually have to even look at my pattern for the border, because I know I'm going to do, when it's the outside color, the B color, I'm going to always do a double crochet there, and then I'll do a back loop for the inner border, which is usually the accent color. Okay, when I count here, I have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 double crochets. I have to make my switch to the pink in this stitch right here, because if you remember, it's going to be covered by a double crochet in the next row. If I were to switch beforehand, I'd be ending my stitch with pink, and that wouldn't look right. Or if I waited till this stitch to switch, you'd see a little bit of white in here. So I'm going to try to switch right here. However, I don't have any single crochets to be able to secure my beginning tail. So when I'm doing pink, these rows, I'll show you what I do when I get to that point. This ridge right here is all going to be behind the double crochets that I'm doing in white. So I'm just going to pick maybe the second one back and loop my pink, tie it right into that. I'll loop it through, and then I'll tie it in a knot. So let me do my 10 double crochets, because we don't have to switch until then. So we're just going to go 1, 2, 3. You'll notice I kind of fold my work over, because it just makes these loops easy to grab if you have a whole bunch in a row like that. 10. Okay, so I'm gonna lay my work flat, because sometimes when I stitch over this way, and I don't want to start here, because if you lay it flat, you notice that's underneath. So I sometimes have to stop, lay it flat, and say, okay, well, there's my next stitch. I need to switch to pink right here, but I could just throw pink in there and loosely switch to it. However, sometimes when I do that, I end up pulling the tail through. So I'm just gonna fold this over a little bit, go back a couple stitches, and I'm just gonna loop the pink right through here and tie a knot. Now, if this is for a blanket that you're gonna see the back, you might want to rethink this. You may want to weave it in here instead of tying a knot, or you may just be a little bit better than I am with, you know, switching over to, and I'm getting all messy, switching over to your color without having to secure it first. Anyway, that's a personal preference. Whenever this is hidden, you can do whatever you want to switch colors, to secure the colors. I just prefer to do it this way because I think it's easy. Okay, so let me get to the right spot here. This is the stitch we're on. And so I need to transition to pink in this stitch right here. And on my charts, that would be a gray square for row B. For row A, those would be light blue squares. So anything that's light blue in row A, they're going to be hidden, so that's where you make your transitions to the other color. Anything in row B that's light gray, that's where you can make your transitions. That's if you transition this way. What I do is I get my back loop. I hope the lighting isn't too bad here. Let me see if I can get this. The lighting, I'm sort of facing the wrong way. Normally you do your stitch by putting your hook in the back loop, grabbing your yarn, and then finishing. But in this case, I don't want to grab white. I just want to grab pink. So in this case, I'm going to grab pink instead. And I'm going to finish my stitch in pink. Voila, magic. Tighten that up a little bit. And so now on our next stitch, I have to be able to stitch in pink. And so, oops, I'm ready to go. And in this case, I'm just going to stitch over the white because I have to carry white with me. So I go 2 back loop single crochets in pink and then a front loop double crochet. So I'm going to do that. And if the lighting's bad, I'm sorry. I'm sort of in the wrong angle to the window. 1, 2, what did I do wrong here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, I just did, okay, I'm really glad I made this mistake because I did this last time. This is super common. You'll notice that if you go down to this loop, straight above this loop is where I did my stitch in. So what I did was I did my transition in the same stitch as where I just did this. So now I have an extra stitch, and that's not what we want. And I've done this so many times you don't even know. This is a super common mistake in Mosaic crochet where I tend to pull towards the right because I'm right-handed, and then I totally just miss where I'm at. So it's super easy, just take it out and lay your work flat. See, I stitched in this stitch. I stitched in this stitch, which is right above where I just stitched. We don't want to do that because obviously there should only be 1 stitch per stitch. So I need to make sure I'm going into the next stitch because I'm trying to show stitch and go, stitch and film. I'm getting all confused. So anyway, let's do that again. So here's our transition in the correct stitch. And again, we have a transition and then 2 back loops. So now I'm going to go 1 back loop. And I apologize if this is wonky in my film. And you notice I stitch over my tail, my white yarn. Now I do a double crochet in the front loop of pink, which should line up pretty well if you are counting correctly and not making the same mistakes I did. So I use my fingernail to sometimes get those front loops. There we go. Okay, in this next one I have to transition back because I see all these white squares, which means that's my background color. I only have that 1 stitch to make that transition. So I'm going to do the exact same thing I did before. I stick my hook into the back loop. I hope you can see this. So stick it in the back loop like you normally do. But instead of grabbing the pink, grab the white, finish your stitch in white. Pink's all wonky. I just got to tighten it up a little bit because you just don't want it to be. Just tighten it a little bit, get it, situated. And now I'm going to do 3, we already did that one. I'm going to do 3 more back loops. 1, 2, 3. I know I was off camera. We have a regular front loop, which is straight down. Actually, I'm sorry. This is what I was talking about before. These arrows actually go to the one above it. So these are just regular. If I ever think of an easier way to symbolize these, I will. But for now, I mean, you know, the arrow is just coming up from above. So just make sure you're paying attention to where that arrow is coming from. These are coming from the purple squares, not the white squares. They're just crossing through the white squares. So these are just regular double crochets, front loop double crochets. So I'm going to do those really quick. Now this one, because I have an angled stitch. You can also check where you're at by looking at these stitches up here. Sometimes it's confusing when you look down here, where am I at? But if you look straight above this one, is that stitch, and so that's my next stitch. That should be where my back loop is, which I check on my chart. Yes, that is where it's at. So I'm going to do my back loop, single crochet, and I'm going to continue bringing my tail through because I do need that pink on the other side. So now I have 3 front loops, and these are hidden because they're they're underneath these angled stitches. Just kind of move them out of the way. You'll see where you need to go. I am using a few more angled stitches in some of my designs because I like how it helps to round out things or form different shapes than the straight up and down pixelated stuff. Although for my heart, you can see how pixely it is, but I do like that. I was thinking about doing a bunch of angled stuff, but I kind of liked the idea of having this chunky, you know, strong angled heart, because hearts are soft and round, but then this kind of gives it that sort of contrast. The design of this soft round heart that means love, but these angles, these strong angles, I don't know. I thought artistically it was kind of an interesting idea. So I'm going to continue this section of white. Whenever I have a back loop single crochet, I continue stitching over this yarn because it helps it not be so messy in the back. You don't have to stitch over the yarn, but it's just a personal preference of mine. It's kind of this weird challenge, like, oh, let's try and see if I can do it. All right, so now I just have to make sure I'm lining up, not that one, but that one. I'm lining up to the right loop, because sometimes it can be a little tricky, a little, you get a little disoriented sometimes after a bunch of areas of the design that may be going different directions and angling out. Sometimes with my stuff, when I get a little more complicated, I can get a little bit disoriented as far as where am I at in the design. Okay, so now we have 3 back loop single crochets. I like to make sure that I'm in the right spot because here I know my first back loop is on this, it should be on a front loop in purple, which it is, so I know that I'm in the right area. So I'm going to do 3 back loops in white. 1, oh come on, 2, 3, and then the next stitch is the gray square where I have to transition to pink. So I bet you guessed what we need to do next. I do start my stitch in the back loop, but I'm just going to grab pink instead of white. And I'll continue with pink. So now it wants sorry, I'm just messing everything up. It wants a front loop double crochet. Let me get this all situated again. So front loop double happens to line up with my last front loop here. I love when that happens because I know I'm in the right spot. And then we go back loop, both in pink. I'm gonna bring my white behind because I like to stitch over to carry my tails. And after that second one, I have the gray transition stitch. And I only know it's transitional because I have to get to white here. If I had a whole bunch of gray squares, it would be a different story. You could stitch as many in pink as you wanted because they'd be hidden, but I have to get from pink to white in one stitch. So go in the back loop, grab white instead, and then bam, transition to white. I don't have any back loop single crochets to be able to stitch over my ending tail, so I'm going to leave pink just hanging, and I'm going to continue out the rest of this row with my front loop double crochets, a back loop, front loop, and my ending single crochet. Okay, we're at the end, and I'm going to go ahead and cut my yarn. I usually like to just verify where I'm at and count. Looks like I have I should have 2 areas of pink that each have 2 back loops and 1 front loop. 2 back loops, 1 front loop. I have 2 and 3 of my white. I like to make sure it's symmetrical. Looks like it's good. Okay, I think I'm good. Then I would cut my yarn. Okay, so now with my pink one, I didn't have anywhere to secure it, so I'm just gonna give myself a little bit of a tail. And in my next row, I do have quite a few back loop single crochets. So I'm just going to bring this up when I'm doing those and stitch over it. So in this next row, we have our blue beginning color, some back loop single crochets. I have to switch from my blue color to the purple by the time I get here. So let me go ahead and start my row. Again, you don't have to use blue, you could use purple, and then you wouldn't have to switch any colors. You just do the whole row in purple or pink or whatever color is, it is you want the outline of your heart to be. So let's get this going. Okay, so I have to switch here. So I like to count back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Sometimes I like to give myself a good 8 stitches to transition to the next stitch, because I figure the first half of those could be me securing the tail, then I make the switch, and then the second half is just, having the purple show through. I don't know why I do that way. It's just a personal preference. I mean, technically you don't really have to switch to purple until you get to this stitch, but I do like to have, if I'm in purple here, I like the stitches on either side to also be purple, because sometimes you can kind of see a little bit of the stitch on the other side. Like you can see on this one right here, how you can see a little bit of the white on this stitch. That's the transition stitch. It is hidden, sort of, but because crochet is done on top of a previous stitch, and every stitch is a little bit to the right of the previous stitch, sometimes you see a little bit of the transitions. So if I can transition before I actually get to where I need the new color, then you don't see as much of it, I guess. I don't know. So what I'm going to do is I'll do a couple stitches, just regular ones, and these are all back loops. 1, 2. Okay, so on this next one I'm going to start securing my beginning tail. So I start the stitch. I'm just going to take, I'm just going to take the beginning tail of purple, lay it over my hook, kind of hold it down with my finger, and then finish my stitch. So this is just caught in the stitch. It's not going to show on the front, but you just caught the tail, so you don't have to worry about securing it. And then I'll do maybe 3 more. Again, I'm just sort of loosey-goosey figuring out where to go. I'm going to grab both of these, and again, when you're stitching, just make sure they're over their hook. They're over the hook, and then when you grab your other color, they're going to be between, you're going to stitch over them. So I grab both sides, and I'll do like 3 stitches. Could be 1 stitch, could be 2. It depends on how many back loop single crochets you have beforehand. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So now I'm going to switch to purple in the next one. All these little tails hiding everywhere. So I start here grab purple instead, finish my stitch in purple, and then I'll just do, I think I need to do my first double crochet in this space right here. So I'll do my 3, sorry I just shook the camera, I'll do 3 back loops here. And just another note with Mosaic, if you are stitching into the tops of double crochets, you're always going to be stitching a back loop single crochet. There's nowhere here for me to even do a front loop double crochet because there's no loops for me to grab. So I know for sure, without even looking at my pattern, these 3 are going to be back loop single crochets. Just a little side note. If for some reason your pattern has something different, that means you probably messed up somewhere. So you just need to go back and find out what happened, where your count was off. And in that case, let's say I messed up and this was supposed to be a double crochet. Instead of, you know, me having to frog everything out, I'm just going to leave this right here. I would just go to the end here, untie this, just frog out up to here, then redo the rest of this row. It's great because you're only having to redo 1 row. I've had some times where I've noticed, oh no, I messed up right here. Well, all I did was I frogged out here, frogged out that row, frogged out, and you just frog out to about maybe here. If your mistake is right here, don't frog the whole row, just, you know, frog out, and frog means to rip out your ribbit, rip it, rip it, rip it, ripping out your stitches. So let's say I messed up right here, so I'd have to undo this row to maybe here, leave the rest of that, undo the next row to just maybe a stitch ahead of that, undo the next row to maybe here, and now I'm on this row and I just only have to undo to here. So it's kind of nice with Mosaic because you have all these ends on the end. You're not having to frog out the whole entire piece. You're just going to that space that you messed up. So anyway, that's kind of a fun little thing that has happened to me a few too many times. But live and learn. So now I'm just going to go to this point. I know, sorry, my papers are getting all messed up. And do my front loop double crochet. So let me finish these back loops. And I have this little pink tail hanging out from before. I could bring this up here and stitch over it, but it's okay. No one's going to see the back of this. I don't know what I do. I may, you know. Okay, so let me finish this one stitch. Get out of there, tail. And I'm going to do my front loop. Get that tail out of the way. Then 1, 2, 3 back loops. And don't get confused on the colors. This is what confuses some people. They see this one and think, oh no, that's not purple. Well, it is whatever the current color is. I don't know if it shows up well on this video, but it's a very light blue. So that light blue just means that they're going to be hidden by the next row. No matter what the color is that's on your hook, those light blue ones will be hidden. So just continue in the purple all the way through this whole entire row. I'll show you what to do on this one because it has an arrow. So we're just going to continue, and there goes my thing. Front loop. One, two, three. My yarn's getting all mixed up. All right, and I have kittens on the ground that are just waiting to try to pounce. 3. Okay, so for this one I have a front loop treble. You could do a double crochet, you just want to do it really loose. But in this case I think a treble looks better. This is an old version of my pattern, but on the current pattern I changed it to TR. So when you see that little, instead of an X, it'll say TR. And once again, like I just said before, I'm contradicting myself. Normally you wouldn't do a front loop anything when you're on top of a double crochet. However, this is crossing over and going into this front loop. So this is where my stitch is located, on top of this. However, I'm crossing over into this front loop. And really that's the only front loop I can get to from here. I could go backwards, and some of my stitches do go backwards, like this one over here is going to go backwards. This one's going to go forwards. And some of my patterns you may see that I'm doing a stitch backwards. So I'll show you what that looks like. We're going to go ahead and do a treble in this one. Okay, and it's super loose. I may go back later with some of these really loose loops. And I sometimes will, oops, let me get lined up here. I sometimes go back with my yarn needle and just take the purple, and I may go through there with purple and just kind of pull it down tight. Most of the loops are fine, and when you're done, sometimes you can just kind of pull and straighten them out. So now I have 3 back loops, but I have to make sure that I'm in the right spot, because when you're here, you almost want to go here, because I just stitched here, so normally you think you're going to go to the next stitch. However, I don't want to skip these stitches I just skipped over. Technically, the stitch is here. It's considered to be located here, even though it reached over into this loop. So I still want to do a back loop here, here, and here. So if you look behind it, that was my last back loop. This is technically the space where this front loop treble went. So I have to still do something with these 2 stitches, because even though this is located in a loop below here, it counted as this stitch. I hope that makes sense. If you're looking at the chart, you can kind of see, like, it counted as that stitch. I still have to do stitches here. So I'm going to do my back loop here. It looks like I have to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Don't confuse this purple square for any other stitch than a back loop, because there's no X, there's no treble, there's nothing in there. It's just, it's purple because it's visible. When I get to the next row, there's not going to be any double crochets covering it. So it's the same stitch as the rest of these, but it's just a visible color. I did that for myself when designing these, because I just didn't want to get confused as far as when I was writing out the patterns or anything like that. It just helped me to design them, that's all. So I'm going to finish out this little group of back loop single crochets. So I see this loop here. Am I going to stitch into it yet? Let me look at my chart. I just got done stitching on top of this double crochet. According to my chart, this is a back loop. And if I keep looking, I have another back loop, and then I have my treble. So just because I got to this, I'm not going to do a stitch yet, because I still have to do 2 back loops before I do it. And it's going to go backwards. It's going to go backwards into that stitch. So some of my charts will have weird little quirky things like this when you see the arrows on the chart. And in the written instructions, I usually have a little paragraph beforehand explaining, you know, hey, here's what's going on with my crazy patterns. Okay, so on this stitch, which is on top of this double crochet, I have to go backwards into that loop. So this stitch is going to be a treble going backwards into this loop. And usually with my patterns, I'm not doing a lot of trebles, but when it's crossing over 2 stitches, I think sometimes trebles are a little bit better. If you want to do doubles, just go for it. Just make sure they're a little bit looser, otherwise your work will pull. Yeah, you can kind of see this loop is a little funky, but like I said, I may go back later with a needle and purple yarn and just kind of stitch it down. It's just, sometimes they work themselves out as you go. All right, so now I have 1, 2, 3 back loops. This stitch took place on top of here, so I go in the next one, which is this one. 1, 2, 3. Then I just do a regular front loop, double crochet, and then 1, 2, 3 back loops. And again, visible, visible, hidden. They're still back loops. Doesn't matter what color the square is. 1, 2, 3. Come on, you. The softer yarn, it's fun to work with, however sometimes it's harder to have it go in without splitting. So now I'm going to, let me get to the right thing here. I'm here, and it just happens to match up with my last loop, which is always fun. The magic of mosaic. So I'm going to do my last front loop, double crochet, and now I have I have 2 more visible squares. I know they have to be purple because they're going to be visible. So I'm going to do 2 more. And now I have a bunch of light blue back loop double crochet, sorry, back loop single crochets before I get to my next visible stitch, which has to be blue. So any one of these I can transition back to blue. So I usually like to do 1 extra, like I said, because if anything shows, you know, through next to the other stitch, at least it'll be in the right color. So I did 1 extra in purple, and then I'm just going to transition to blue in this next one. And I also like to have a few extra back loop single crochets to be able to stitch over the purple tail that I'm going to have. If I waited till this very last thing, I wouldn't have any extra stitches to stitch over my purple tail. But now I have all these stitches where I can stitch over the purple tail and know that it'll be a bit more secure. And you know what we forgot to do? We forgot to stitch over this. Normally I would bring this up, stitch over it while I was doing that. That's okay, it's not a huge deal. I can always take a yarn needle and stitch it in there. So just do maybe 4 stitches. 1, 2, I'm just kind of keeping my purple in there behind it. 3, 4, I'm going to drop the purple, not worry about it. And now just stitch over just the blue, not stitch over, just use the blue to the end of the row. Do my border, the last back loop, and then my ending single crochet. Okay, that's it. And then I have purple, I can just cut this off somewhere. Anyway, I hope that made sense to you, the way I do some of my transitions. I'll show you really quick how, there's other patterns I have that I refer to a clean transition, where, let's say, I had to go straight from white to pink and there was no purple in between. There was nothing in between to hide it. That's pretty easy. I'll set that up really quick and show you. I'll transition to my, from white to pink in this next one with a clean transition, even though technically in this pattern it's going to be hidden, but this will at least give you the idea. Okay, so I've gotten to my next row and I've gotten 7 of these done. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 altogether. Let's pretend this is a pink square, meaning that that would have been a visible stitch, and we had 2 colors right next to each other in the same row. We don't have any gray squares or light blue squares to hide that transition. So, and this is a pretty common way to transition to colors that other people do. I'm going to call it a clean switch based on the fact that it's a cleaner transition. You don't usually have the extra colors showing through like how our other transitions were, where you started in one color and ended in the other color. So what you would do is, let me secure my pink first. My really messy way to do it. I'm just gonna, and you know, the way you secure the beginning tail really doesn't matter for the transition. This is just me doing my thing. Some people don't even secure it. They just work it right in. And that'll work too. So what you want to do for this clean transition, if you had 2 colors right next to each other, no gray transition area, just pink right next to white, or let's say purple right next to blue, or any other color. My other patterns, the gnome pattern, the mushroom pattern, the hummingbird, some of those, the mermaid, they have a lot of these where you have to go from one color to another immediately. You don't have any hidden stitches to transition in between. So what you do, sorry, I'm bumping my rig here. You start the stitch, the very last of the color, in this case, the very last white one, I'm going to start the stitch, whether it's a double crochet or a single crochet, just start it out like you normally do. When you have 2 loops left on your hook, grab that new color. And I'm going to try to put my yarn behind it. So what you'll notice is it finished this stitch in white. The pink is pretty much not part of the stitch at all. Other than you can see a little bit peeking through there, but it's not part of the stitch at all. If I would have done the transition in a different way, like I do with my, you know, going my back loop single crochets, I usually this top loop is the new color and the rest of it's the old color, which doesn't matter if it's hidden. But in this case, you want that top loop to be the same color as what you started because this is all white anyway. But now I can start my next stitch. Let's say this next stitch was pink. I have to have this stitch fully in pink. And so you'll notice this whole stitch now is fully pink. This whole stitch is fully white. My colors are right next to each other. So I don't have to worry about the design being sort of messy because it's more of a clean switch from one color to another. So when I say clean switch, that's what I mean. You start the stitch out. I'll do it back to white here, even though that's not what the pattern calls for. But let's say you had a back loop single crochet and you had to clean switch to the other. So you remember, you start your stitch, 2 loops left on your hook, just switch right over. And so you can see now I have pink all done in one color and I'm ready to go with white in the next. So that's how I do the clean switch. Anyway, I hope this video made sense. I'm going to continue working on my heart, and I should have this pattern up pretty soon in time for Valentine's Day. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. You could reach me on Ravelry, Facebook. If you've bought any of my patterns, I have my email listed on there as well. So anyway, thanks. Have a great day.